Exchange between organisms and their environment. How does the size of an organism and its structure relate to its surface area to volume ratio? How do larger organisms increase their surface area to volume ratio? How are surfaces specially adapted to facilitate exchange? So organisms must transfer materials between them and the environment, and once they are absorbed, they must be distributed to the cells, and waste products must be returned to the exchange surface for removal via a transport system. The size and metabolic rate affects the amount of material exchanged and influences the type of exchange surface and transport system evolved to meet the requirements of each organism. So the type of things that get exchanged are respiratory gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids and minerals, excretory products and heat. And these things can be exchanged either passively, where there's no energy required by diffusion and osmosis, or actively, where energy is required by active transport. The surface area to volume ratio. Exchange at the surface of an organism. However, materials that are absorbed are used by cells and make up its volume. So for an effective exchange, the surface area must be large compared to its volume. So small organisms have larger surface area to volume ratio, whereas larger organisms have a smaller surface area to volume ratio. So therefore, simple diffusion of materials across the surface of a larger organism would only be good for inactive organisms. So some organisms have evolved special adaptations. So things like the planaria or flatworm have a flattened shape. Therefore, the diffusion pathway is shorter, no cell is far from the surface. Or they can have specialised exchange surfaces with a large area to increase the surface area to volume ratio. And examples of specialised exchange systems would be lungs of humans or gills of fish. So features of a specialised exchange surfaces are they will all have a large surface area to volume ratio to increase the rate of the exchange. They will all be very thin, so they have a short diffusion pathway, and so materials cross rapidly. They'll be partially permeable, so materials can cross without obstruction, and there will be movement of internal and external medium. So the blood will carry like carbon dioxide away if it was from the alveoli. It will carry carbon dioxide to the alveolus and oxygen away from the alveolus, and then air is breathed in and out to maintain that diffusion gradient. So features of specialised exchange surfaces. So and a good equation to remember is the equation for Fick's law. And Fick's law states that diffusion is proportional to the surface area times the difference in concentration divided by the length of the diffusion pathway. So you want the two things on the top of the equation to be big and the one on the bottom to be small. So you want a large surface area, large concentration gradient and a small diffusion pathway. Now, thin specialised exchange surfaces are easily damaged, so they're usually found inside the organism, but then you'd need some way of getting the external medium over the surface, which is why we have ventilation in the lungs. So just a bit of kind of imagining and proving that surface area to volume ratio changes with the size of the organism. If you imagined a mouse was a 1 centimetre sized cube, then if you calculated the surface area, remember that to find the surface of one face, it'd be 1 times 1, but because there's 6 faces, you have to times it by 6. And then the volume is just length times width times height. And then for the hippo, you'd have to find this face, so like 2 by 4, and then that face 4 by 4, etc., and then find out what the total surface area is, and then find its volume, which would still be 2 times 4 times 4. So if you did work that out, the surface area to volume ratio of a small animal or the cube, would be 6 to 1, but the surface area to volume ratio of the larger animal would be only 2 to 1. So larger organisms have a smaller surface area in comparison to their volume. Next bit, exchange organs and mass transport systems. Single-celled organisms, so substances can diffuse directly into or out of the cell across the cell surface membrane. The diffusion rate is quick because of the small distances the substances have to travel. Now, multicellular organisms, the diffusion across the outer membrane is too slow because some cells are deep within the body and there's a big distance between them and the outside environment. And also larger animals have a lower or a smaller surface area to volume ratio. And it's difficult to exchange enough substances to supply a large volume of animal through a relatively small outer surface. So rather than using straightforward diffusion to absorb and excrete substances, multicellular organisms need specialised exchange organs. They also need an efficient system to carry substances to and from their cells. So this is a mass transport system. In mammals, the mass transport system is a circulatory system, which uses blood to carry glucose in the plasma and oxygen in the red blood cells around the body. It also carries hormones, antibodies and waste like carbon dioxide within the plasma. And mass transport in plants involves the transport of water and ions in the xylem, or solutes like sucrose in the phloem. Next bit is heat exchange. So mammals have a constant body temperature because they're warm-blooded. They have to maintain that body temperature. So they have a high respiratory rate so they can generate heat. And heat is transferred to the environment by conduction, convection and radiation. And the effectiveness of heat control depends on environmental temperature and the surface area. So large surface area to volume ratio, like the shrew, has faster heat loss from the skin and might lose so much heat from its surface that it must eat its own body weight of food every day and also hibernate in winter. The elephant has a smaller surface area to volume ratio. It's harder to lose heat because it's got a large body mass, so it increases its surface area to volume ratio with its large ears, and its skin has wrinkles. Now, in cold climates, animals tend to be larger than like animals which have a smaller surface area volume ratio. They'll have small external projectiles like ears or snouts. And aquatic animals tend to lose heat faster because heat is conductive faster. So yeah, they struggle to maintain that heat. So in a cold environment, they will have a smaller surface area to volume ratio, so they don't lose as much heat. And in a hot environment, they'll have a larger surface area to volume ratio to help them lose heat. So a walrus that lives in the Arctic ice shelf has a surface area to volume ratio of 6.5 to 1, whereas manatees, which live near the West Indies, have a surface area to volume ratio which is higher, 9.4 to 1. There are also some behavioural or physiological adaptations that organisms can have. So animals with a large surface area to volume ratio lose more water because it evaporates from their surface. So animals living in hot regions where water evaporates quickly may have kidneys which adapt their urine so that it is more concentrated. So actually camels have urine like treacle so that they conserve the water. And also to support high metabolic rates, small mammals living in cold regions need to eat lots of high energy foods such as seeds and nuts. And smaller mammals might have thick layers of fur or hibernate when the winter gets really cold. Larger organisms living in hot regions such as elephants and hippos find it hard to keep cool because their heat loss is relatively slow. Elephants have developed large flat ears which increase their surface area, allowing them to lose more heat. And another behavioural adaptation is that hippos spend a lot of the day in water which is a behavioural adaptation to help them lose heat.